Hi, I'm Ben, welcome back to my channel. Booker season is back and I am so excited about it. At the time that I'm filming this, there is exactly 1 month to go until we get the 2024 long list of 12 or 13 books, although in practice it's always 13. That's coming on the 30th of July. Just under 7 weeks later, on the 16th of August, it will be whittled down to a short list of 6 books, and then the winner will be crowned on the 12th of November. But I think right now might be my favourite period of the entire process, when everyone's speculating about what's going to make it onto the long list. It feels like nothing is off the table. Popular books could be snubbed and unknown books could come out of nowhere and surprise us. Basically, the winner is probably out there sitting on shelves or it's in readers' hands and we just don't know it yet. As usual, I can't help dipping my toes into the pond of speculation, and so in today's video, I'm sharing my predictions for the 2024 Booker Prize longlist. First though, let's run through some of the eligibility criteria we have to keep in mind when making a prediction. Number 1, it must be a long form item of fiction, which technically rules out short story collections, but not novels and stories, as evidenced by last year's shortlisting of If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. The actual hurdle to clear, as it's stated in the rules, is that the book must be substantial and unified, which I imagine might be a point of debate among the judges. Number 2, it must be written in English. If a book is a translation, it is eligible instead for the International Booker Prize. Number 3, it must be published in the UK or Ireland between the 1st of October 2023 and the 30th of September 2024. This rules out some books which might seem like solid guesses, but were actually released too early, like V.V. Ganeshananthan's Brotherless Night, which won both the Women's Prize and the Carol Shields Prize, but came out way too early in June 2023. And it also rules out former Booker winner Anne Enright's The Wren, which came out in August 2023. It also means that some hotly anticipated books coming out later in the year are not eligible, like the recently announced new titles from Alan Hollinghurst, Ali Smith and Anne Tyler. All of those will be eligible for the 2025 prize. Number 4, authors must be alive at each stage to continue to be eligible. And while this can be overruled at the discretion of the director of the prize, it likely means we won't see Baumgartner by Paul Auster on the long list, which would have been in contention had he not passed away a few months ago. 5, publishers are limited by the number of books that they can submit, which is determined by 2 things: the number of nominations they've received in the last 5 years, and whether they're publishing books by previously shortlisted authors. So that last 5 years rule pans out a bit like this. You can submit 1 book if you've had no books longlisted. You can submit 2 books if you've had 1 or 2 books longlisted, and you get 3 submissions if you've had 3 or more books longlisted. But you might be wondering, what happens if a publisher has 2 great books but only 1 submission slot? Well, they can only submit 1 of them to definitely be read by the judges, but they can suggest additional books for a call-in, and the judges get to decide whether they want to call in the book to be read based on a letter of justification and a sample chapter. The judges will call in at least 10 books, and interestingly, they don't need to be books that are suggested. Judges can just request specific books that they like, even if the publishers have not submitted them or suggested them. In addition to the above, if you are publishing the work of a previously shortlisted author, you're entitled to automatically submit this in addition to your quota. From my research, I think there are 15 books from previous shortlistees that have been or will be released in the eligibility window. In alphabetical order by author surname, those books are The Voyage Home by Pat Barker, Rosarita by Anita Desai, The Women Behind the Door by Roddy Doyle, James by Percival Everett, Question 7 by Richard Flanagan, although it's a bit unclear whether this should be classed as fiction or non-fiction, What Will Survive of Us by Howard Jacobson, Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, My Friends by Hisham Matar, Choice by Neil Mukherjee, The Road to the Country by Chigozie Obioma, Caledonian Road by Andrew O'Hagan, The Spoiled Heart by Sanjeev Sahota, There Are Rivers in the Sky by Alif Shafak, Tell Me Everything by Elizabeth Strout, and Long Island by Colm Tabine. 4 of these are books from previous winners: the Barker, the Doyle, Flanagan and Jacobson. And interestingly, there's quite a few sequels in the mix. So I think the Pat Barker is the 3rd in a trilogy. The Women Behind the Door is Doyle's follow-up to a previous book that he's written. And Long Island by Colm Tabine is the sequel to Brooklyn. Sequels don't often get a look in at the Booker, but it's not unheard of. Hilary Mantel was famously nominated for all 3 of her Thomas Cromwell books and won for 2 of them. And with all of these automatic entries, we could end up with a long list made up entirely of authors that have previously been shortlisted. It's extremely unlikely, but it could happen. There are some more eligibility criteria, but I think it's quite boring if I just regurgitate a PDF. And the criteria determine the books which can be submitted, but ultimately it's up to the judges. They're the ones who will read them and decide what makes the long list. So it's interesting to just run through who's on the panel. This year's judging panel is headed up by Edmund Dewall, an internationally acclaimed artist and author. He's joined by Yi-Yun Lee, who is an author that I think will be familiar to a lot of people on BookTube. She was a finalist for this year's Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. Sarah Collins is another award-winning novelist, probably best known for her book The Confessions of Franny Langton. Justine Jordan is the fiction editor at The Guardian, and Nitin Sawhney is a musician, composer and producer. I think this panel seems excellent, and I'm feeling really good about their taste and what it means for the long list that they'll present to us. With all of this in mind, I set about trying to put my predictions together a few months ago, and at first I was doing what I usually do, going by gut feel, trying to create a list that I think would be interesting but feels like a list we might actually get, trying to get that balance right. As I was doing that this year, I found myself just putting together lots of books from quite small publishers, or when I was checking on Eligibility, I'd realised that I'd included more books from a certain publisher than they were actually able to submit. And while I thought my original list could be quite cool and exciting, I did start to wonder just how likely it was. Could we really end up with a list that looked like this? And that was when I realised I just didn't have the data to answer that question. So I did what any self-respecting book nerd would do, and I made a spreadsheet. I took the last 10 years of long lists and tried to spot some patterns and figure out what was the most likely shape of the long list that we'd get. And I found some pretty interesting stuff. First and foremost, I noticed that over the last 10 years, over 60% of all Booker nominations have come from just 12 publishers. And I'm going to name these publishers the Booker bigwigs. Most of the ones on screen now have their names included in their logos, but just for the absence of doubt, the CW one is Chatto and Windus, the JC is Jonathan Cape, the HH is Hamish Hamilton, the FF is Faber and Faber, and the little guy with the bow and arrow is Bloomsbury. These aren't necessarily the biggest 12 publishers or anything, they are just the 12 highest performing ones in the Booker Prize, according to some simple ranking that I did on the data. In most years, more than half of the list comes from these bigwigs, the only exception being last year, 2023, when they only accounted for 6 titles from the long list, which is still a substantial chunk. Typically, 6 of these 12 publishers feature on any given list, but it's been as low as just 5 of them and as high as 8. In every year, at least one bigwig publisher has had multiple books on the long list. In 5 of those years, 2 of these publishers have had multiple books, and in 2 of these years, 3 have had multiple books. They really are quite dominant. The rest of the long list is typically made up of 3 to 5 books from sizable publishers outside of the bigwigs, and then 1 or 2 books from truly small presses. There are, of course, exceptions, and I'm just talking about the average makeup of a long list. There are a couple of other observations about the long list, again, all based on the last 10 years, which I thought were pretty interesting. There are, on average, 3 formally shortlisted authors included, and on 7 out of 10 long lists, one of these was a former winner. There is also usually an overlap of 2 to 3 books with the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction, which this year has just been won by Hisham Matar's My Friends. So, given all of this analysis, what is there to take from this when it comes to making predictions? Well, it means that the best strategy is just to pick books exclusively from the bigwigs. Will the list be entirely from them? Almost certainly not. But if they make up 8 spots on the long list, then guessing exclusively from the bigwig books makes it more likely you'll hit on the 8 that make it. But I think that's kind of boring, so I want my predictions to a little more closely reflect what the list might actually look like. So while I won't go into excruciating detail on how I picked my picks, and trust me, embarrassingly, there is much more to this, I'll be choosing 8 from the bigwigs, 4 from other established publishers, and 1 from a genuinely small press. And of course, I'm going to organise them into categories as usual. My first category is called Blurb Appeal, and these are 3 books that have been blurbed by a judge. They all sound like really good Booker contenders anyway, but knowing that a judge also already likes them makes it feel more likely that the book will make it onto the list. It proved true last year for This Other Eden, and it's blurbed by head judge Essie Adujan, so hopefully it will work out this time too. The first book here is This Strange Eventful History by Claire Massoud. This is a sweeping historical book that I think covers about 100 years and is informed loosely by Claire Massoud's own family history. I think this sounds absolutely phenomenal anyway, but one of the reasons it stood out to me is Yi-Yun Lee's blurb. She says, a tour de force. This strange eventful history is one of those rare novels which a reader doesn't merely read, but but lives through with the characters. Call it the War and Peace of the 20th and 21st century. This is the same Yi-Yun Lee who did a read-along of War and Peace during lockdown and released a War and Peace reading companion called Tolstoy Together. You've got to assume that she loves this book and is going to be fighting for it in the judges' meetings. So yeah, this is the book I'm probably most confident we'll see on the list, and I'm really looking forward to reading it either way. The next book is The Unsettled by Ayanna Mathis, and this is another one blurbed by Yi-Yun Lee, who describes Mathis as one of the most brilliant writers working today and says this book is poetic and fierce. It's a story of family survival told across 3 generations, mainly in the 1980s when a woman called Ava and her son are placed into a shelter in Philadelphia. It's supposed to be complex and beautifully written and heartrending. The final book in this category is The Lost Love Songs of Boise Sing by Ingrid Persaud. This one is blurbed by Sarah Collins, who said, Persaud has a knack for finding the sublime in the ordinary. This is the story of 4 women who are connected by their relationship to a notorious but charismatic gangster called Boise Sing. I'm kind of expecting this to be an expert exercise in voice. I know her award-winning previous novel Love After Love was really highly praised by a lot of people on Instagram and booktube, and this one has been calling out to me from bookshop tables, so I'd love to have the nudge to read it. My next category is called Road to Success. So last year was the year of 3 pools, and this year I think it could be the year of 3 roads. And the first road that I want to tell you about is Caledonian Road by Andrew O'Hagan. O'Hagan is an author that's appeared on the Booker longlist and shortlist multiple times before, and this is a big Dickensian state of the nation novel with a huge cast and lots of sensibilities that I think will chime with the history of English literature. Another thing that I think makes this a little bit more likely is that I saw that Nitin Sawhney loves Dickens. He thinks he's a great author. This feels quite Dickensian in scope. And Yi-Yun Lee, as already mentioned, loves War and Peace. And we do tend to get one big chunkster, so I think we could well see this on the list. The next road is The Coast Road by Alan Murrin. I read this one really recently, and it's just an exquisite debut about 3 women living in Ireland at a time where society just wants them to be wives. I'll be reviewing this one in full soon, but I thought it was really, really brilliant. I enjoyed my time with it. And just another check in the box of Irish literature, proving how fantastic it is. I should mention at this point that the judge, Justine Jordan, who is the fiction editor at The Guardian, she has studied Anglo-Irish literature. And so I think it makes it more likely that we'll see a couple of Irish books on the list. My final road is The Road to the Country by Chigozie Obioma. And this is a new book from an author that has never not been shortlisted for the Booker Prize. He's had 2 novels before, both have made the shortlist. This is his new book about 2 brothers who are divided on either side of a civil war in Biafra. It's had really exceptional reviews. I still haven't managed to read it, but I really, really want to, because it just sounds brilliant and heartbreaking. But yeah, it's hard to imagine an author with a performance record like this not making it onto the long list. My next category is Extraordinary Journeys. And these are not just physical journeys, although there are a few here that are pretty extraordinary, but they may be journeys of character or of relationships. And this category definitely doesn't exist just because I had some books left over that didn't fit into the other categories. The first book in this category is one that I toyed with not including because it doesn't seem massively to me like a very bookery book at first glance. It feels more like a Pulitzer Prize winner, but at the same time, it's just so undeniable that I ended up not being able to leave it out. And that is James by Percival Everett. I've spoken about this quite a few times on the channel. It's a retelling of Huckleberry Finn, and it is close to perfect. I think this is an amazing, amazing novel. Everett has previously been shortlisted for the Booker very recently in 2022 for The Trees, which was also fantastic. So this will definitely be read by the judges, and I would challenge anyone to read this and not be won over by it. So I think it really, really should be on the list. It would be a shame if it's not. It's just a marvelous book. Oh yeah, and I should say the journey here is both the physical journey of Jim going on the run from his slave master, but also his journey of transforming from Jim to James over the course of the novel. I think it's brilliantly done. The next extraordinary journey is in a completely different direction, specifically 250 miles up above the Earth's surface, and that is Orbital by Samantha Harvey. This is one I also read recently. It's a very short, snappy little book, and it follows the mundane day-to-day activities of 6 astronauts on the International Space Station. I think this is such an interesting, captivating little book that is very well written. It has lots of reflections about meaning and perspective and art and family. And I think it's something that should appeal to some of the artistic sensibilities of judges like Edmund de Waal and Nitin Sawhney. It gave me a lot to think about, and I can imagine the judges chewing on it and seeing it as a book that has an impact that outsizes what its very slim page count might suggest. It would also be an interesting return to the longlist for publisher Jonathan Cape. They used to very reliably be on the list, so much so that they made the bigwig publishers list that I put together, but they haven't actually had a nomination in the last 5 years. It'll be really interesting to see if they can get back on it with this one. My next extraordinary journey is one of a relationship, and that is The Fertile Earth by Ruthvika Rao. This is a sweeping story set in post-independence India about 4 children who forge a friendship across class lines. That is, until they are caught up in a devastating accident that ripples throughout their whole lives. It sounds absolutely epic, and I just can't wait to get into it. This actually isn't out until the 5th of September, but it's published by One World, who just know how to pick a winner. They have only been nominated 4 times in the last 10 years, but on 3 of those occasions, including last year with Prophet Song, their book went on to win. So when it comes to the Booker, they really know what they're doing, and this sounds like another brilliant novel from them. My final extraordinary journey is Heart Be at Peace by Donal Ryan, and this is because it's a journey through the minds of many different characters. It's a sort of sequel or companion piece to Ryan's previously longlisted The Spinning Heart, which was nominated in 2013. This new novel is set 10 years later and has the same conceit. It tells the story of a small town by having each chapter told from the perspective of a different person who lives there. Early reader reviews have been pretty glowing, with people particularly praising the quality of the character voices. And I do know that Justine Jordan is a big fan of Donal Ryan, having been on the jury for a prize that he has won. So it seems like he might have a cheerleader in the room, and this gives this book a decent chance of making it onto the long list. My final category is called Body Popping, and these are books that are a little bit weird, involve bodies in interesting and unusual ways, things that challenge the reader to think about their bodies and the bodies of those around them in a little bit of a different way. My first pick here is Phantom Limb by Chris Kohler. This is a book coming from the publishers Atlantic, who are also publishing Neil Mukherjee's Choice. But I think that book, from what I've heard about it, seems like 3 separate stories that are more thematically connected than plotly connected. I don't think plotly is a word, but you know what I mean. And I think it might therefore not clear the hurdle of being unified. This book, however, sounds weird and wonderful and great. It's about a Scottish minister who falls into a hole left by a dug up elm tree, and there he finds a disembodied hand. The hand beckons to him and it starts to write, revealing a history of Scottish Reformation, of art, of violence, and the minister uses this hand to reinvent himself as a prophet. I assume there's going to be dire consequences for that. It's another one where I think the art side of it might appeal to Edmund de Waal, and he has also expressed his love for the book Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which also takes a kind of strange turn, and so I think the judges might be open to this one. The next book is my choice from a small press, and I've gone with one from the small press probably most successful in the Booker in recent years, Galley Beggar Press. They've had nominations for Ducks Newburyport and After Sappho, and I think this could be their next. I've chosen Mary and the Rabbit Dream by Noemi Kistiaki. This is a novel about a real historical figure called Mary Toft, who managed to deceive 18th century England into believing that she was giving birth to rabbits. It sounds like a funny premise, but I think it's got a very serious message about bodily autonomy and the realities of being a poor woman hundreds of years ago. And I'm expecting it to have some thematic connections with what's going on in our own world today. My final pick for this category and my final pick for my long list predictions is The Night Alphabet by Joelle Taylor. I couldn't not include this. It's one of the best things I've read this year. I think it is inventive and exciting and poetic, and it would be absolutely right to reward this with a place on the Booker long list. This is the story of a woman called Jones who goes to get one final tattoo to connect all of the tattoos that already exist on her body. She asks for one thin line joining them, and as that line is drawn, she tells the story of each tattoo, her experience of falling into another person's body, a remembering of another life. What Taylor's done is something very clever to bring together what could be a very disparate set of stories, but actually unite them under this central driving plot. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I'm not 100% sure of its chances to get onto the long list, but I did see that Nitin Sawhney's favourite opening line ever is from William Gibson's Neuromancer, so hopefully they'll have a bit of an appetite for something sci-fi adjacent on the list. So those are my predictions. I'm really excited to share them with you, and I'm a bit disappointed that I've got to go and sit and edit this video now before I can post it. I'd love to hear what you think about these. Does this sound like a likely or a good long list to you? Which books do you think are going to make the list? And do you have any plans to read along with the list, or does it depend on what that looks like once it's announced? Do let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit like, because it really helps the channel out. And if you'd like to see more from me, including some future Booker content, then please do hit subscribe. But until next time, toodles.